There's nothing wrong with being in a room with people who are smarter than you, getting feedback from those people. All you get is growth. All you get is upside. In reality, the great leader, the CEO, is a listener. They are caring about the people and the vision. They're passionate about the things that have to get done to get there. Try to be pure to using the right AI LLM underneath, and then deliver your model. Your family, your health is much more important than work, always. At the same time, your work is important because you put a lot of your life into it, right? You're spending 8 hours a day at least on this. So let's find a way to make those things live together.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Technocratic Podcast, where my guests and I share practical insights and wisdom for executives who want to jump into the top 1%. Today, our guest is Nasser Chanda, CEO of Paymerang, a world-class payment automation platform. Nasser has built and led organizations for FinTech, management consulting, and many more for years. He's held roles as president of Brinks Global Payments, and he's been VP of Investment Banking at PwC, amongst other roles. Nasser and I got to know each other over the last few years, and I was always really impressed by his natural leadership abilities and able to juggle multiple initiatives at once and his strong focus on growth. We're really excited to have him on the show today. Welcome to the podcast, Nasser.
Hey, Bobby, great to be here.
Awesome. Thanks for joining. So, Nasser, we're going to get right into it. Obviously, you've been in the FinTech space for quite a while, and you know it very, very well. And in the last couple of years, of course, AI has exploded. Lots of companies are adopting AI. What do you see as the future in the next couple of years of AI and its impact in the FinTech space? Do you have any kind of insights or thoughts on that?
Yeah, my advice to folks who want to use AI in FinTech is just think of jobs to be done and attack those jobs and get some incremental wins and then build on top of that. Don't start with a massive AI vision and start to talk, conceptually to people. Talk about solving problems and jobs to be done. I'll give you 2 examples. At Paymerang, we're ingesting invoices and taking that data and then structuring it. And when we did that, we used machine learning AI to extract and structure that data. That solved a specific problem of taking manual paper processes and turning it into structured data and automated processes. Mm-hmm. So now we're allowing companies to process invoices, understand what's in that data, using automation and not touching any paper. That solved the problem. It less manpower for us to extract information from data and key it in, less work for the client, more insights, more automation, more efficiency. I mean, it just solved the problem and it worked.
Yeah.
We took that same building block and we said, because we were processing payments and we'd see a lot of payment data come across, we had clients that wanted to get insight into their data. So we built a little AI engine on top of it that looked at that data, tried to understand it, and presented it back to clients that they could just ask a free-flowing question, like a unstructured question, and it would then produce the results. And the results were pretty impressive. Again, we're just solving a problem. We have CFOs, controllers, and accountants out there using our solution. Mm-hmm. They want to know, who are they paying? How often are they paying? And is there any sort of anomaly, that would catch fraud or things like that? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so we were just trying to, again, jobs to be done. Right. So those were the building blocks. You get more confidence, you get legs under you, you prove the technology, you know how to use it. It's tangible. People understand it. Now you can take that next step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So focus on the use cases, right? Focus on the jobs to be done. That's super important. What do you say to people who are saying AI is too expensive to bring in to FinTech? Like it's very costly and it's, basically not going to give you the results that you want. What do you say to those? Are those folks just being nervous Nellies, or do you feel like they have a point?
I think that, again, they may be trying to boil the ocean or getting very conceptual with what they want to use for AI. So they may not know what the job is to be done. So they're saying, let's enable our company to be AI ready. In that case, they may be thinking of buying a platform or using a big tool that's heavy, expensive, lots of training, and it could slow down the velocity of the company. Yeah, that is expensive. Mm-hmm. But again, start something small with a job to be done and build incremental, steps. AI is not expensive. So you could, access the models that are out there, ChatGPT, Cloud, etc. You can access those in a private environment for a relatively cheap price. You could also access it within your cloud environment at a relatively cheap price. But don't boil the ocean. And probably my other advice to companies that want to use AI is keep it low quiet and just get some wins under you versus announcing broad strategies. When you announce a broad AI strategy across a large organization, guess what happens? Everybody wants a seat on the table. It's the sexiest thing.
Right.
And you're just going to get cost overload because everyone has a new idea. And so it becomes people pile on with all these ideas. And the thing you want to build now is not achievable. So keep it a little small, get some incremental wins, and then show it to your company. And then encourage them to get those types of small wins.
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy. It does seem like, especially for certain size companies, like mid-market companies, do you think, you guys obviously built something in-house, like pseudo in-house, obviously it was somebody else's model, but is it better to build? Is it better to buy? Or is it better to partner for these? Let's say you have a list of really useful high ROI or use cases. Some do you buy versus build, or how do you even know what to do in your opinion? Like, strategy?
I think again, if you define the problem to be solved, first look outside. So if you're there's a saying: if you're trying to solve a problem, someone's already solved it before.
Yeah.
So look outside. There's probably a tool that's available at a relatively inexpensive cost. In the last decade or so, with cloud, AWS, Azure, et cetera. The game for a startup has changed completely. You now can get an instance going and access services as you need them and turn it on as you use them.
Right.
At a cost that's probably a fraction of what it used to be, at 1/10 of what it used to be, right? And within those platforms, there are AI tools. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The models are out there, right? ChatGPT, Cloud, et cetera. I think that those models are going to be like electricity. And interchange them. So one thing we did do, by the way, is when we built our invoice extraction tool, what we did was kept multiple input points available. So in case, for example, in the future, one of our service providers for the OCR piece raised prices, we could switch over to another one. So we kept that stability in our application. But I would say, look outside first. Keep flexibility to switch out your provider so no one has you under the gun.
So buy first, possibly buy or partner maybe, and then build second, or maybe it's a hybrid of those.
And solve the problem first before you think about buying.
Like solve it on paper in quotes, right? Try to figure out like if this solution works, what would the ideal sort of business outcome be? How would we actually do it to make that outcome happen? And then go and start getting AI and building around it and stuff versus just starting on the AI part.
Exactly. And, most people, why do they buy instead of build? Or why do they build instead of buy or partner? Because they think down the road, someone might hold them hostage for price, right? But there's so many available providers of those tools that if you just keep your platform flexible for the input from the AI engine, no one's going to hold you hostage.
Exactly. And it's actually an interesting nuance because with AI, it's like you're definitely, as a mid-market company, so not like a startup or an SMB or something, or an enterprise, large enterprise, you're definitely not going to really build your own large language model. That's not happening. That's probably way too expensive or maybe dangerous if you're using open source or something. But you are going to look at maybe building some of the stuff on top of it. And so it's interesting because that stuff might be so proprietary and you specialize to your use case that there may not be other commercial products out there that can help you to do it. So then you might, and maybe in your case, you built some of it in-house. You used a commercial large language model. And as you guys kind of test things out and see how it works, at some point, maybe there's a product that comes out that does do some of what you're talking about. Maybe you can eventually switch to that. Is that a viable path forward for people?
Yeah. So, the idea is you don't want the same people doing the same thing at the same time. So people are building large language models with billions of dollars of investment and lots of server farms. That's the last thing you want to replicate. You're building the proprietary application on top of that. And so that's where you should really focus. And even when you're building that proprietary application on top, you may find components that someone has built for those use cases. So really, what is the real proprietary secret sauce? Focus your energies on that. I think Steve Jobs was a fan of deep focus,
Right.
deep, delivery and focus of a single problem that nobody else is solving. And if other people are solving and putting billions of dollars into it, you don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, there's also a famous saying, riches are in the niches. I always like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that very specialized use case. But Nasser, what about this? Because let's say you're getting the LLM from OpenAI. Okay, obviously you're not going to build that yourself. But what about this notion of like buying the layer on top of that from a third party that is doing your secret sauce, and you're buying it because you don't have the in-house expertise? Like, let's say you're a tech-enabled services company. You don't have a long history of having 100 engineers in the company or something. Maybe you only have 20 engineers in the company. At that point, your secret sauce is done by some third party. When, as a CEO, should you be, or business, should you be okay with that? Under what circumstances? That's one circumstance, but like, how should you make yourself okay with that? Or should you not try? Should you try to just hire engineers and make it yourself if it's your secret sauce?
I think even that's viable. So for example, in a past life, we were building an application on top of a readily available AI engine. So when we were doing that, we had engineers that were, doing notations and understanding what the model was giving us so they could perfect that model for the application. So we sold that to clients. Now, those clients could have built themselves on top of Google or Amazon, AWS, but they didn't have the availability of the engineers to get that piece done. They were providing a service or a solution outside to their customers. They needed us with the second layer on top of the AI to do that. They didn't have the engineering resources. So they still had secret sauce in their layer. Their layer was the delivery to the customer. They still had some secret sauce there that we didn't cover. So I would say, if you don't, go crazy hiring 20 engineers because you don't have a certain expertise, there is something that's very specific to your company that is fine to focus on.
Do you believe that right now, with the startup environment, that the way that it is, where the market is getting flooded by AI startups, that a company that's looking to purchase like a really critical piece of their technology ecosystem, should they trust a company that's in Series A, Series B? Should they say, oh, okay, we're going to experiment with this? Or should they maybe wait until the larger players or gets that capability, or more substantial, stable organization provides that product? Because I see a lot of smaller firms in the $50 million, $100 million range. They're out there buying AI startup products, and sometimes that's dangerous for a lot of different reasons. What's your take on that?
Yeah, you want to de-risk that a little bit. I agree. It's very frothy, and there's a lot of business plans getting a lot of money without solving problems. So you got to be careful with that. I say try to be pure. Try to be pure to using the right AI LLM underneath, and then delivering your model. And if there's something proven that has done it, when we went out to, for example, deliver that solution on top of AI for our customers, right? They looked at us and they said, look, you're doing this for 40, 50 customers. So it's proven. For them, that was good enough. Now, just look at how many use cases are out there.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And if the company has enough proven use cases of their layer on top, I think it's viable to use.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly right. I mean, you really have to test these companies out. Like, you really have to use your own company's data, and you look beyond their demo, basically, and use your own company's data with their AI tool. And then if it's proving to be valuable, take the next step and do a pilot program or something like that.
And then the other thing is, how locked down is their security and privacy? Because the last thing you want to do is feed a model that's going to go to your competitors.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. So do your due diligence. That's awesome, Nasser. Okay, let's switch gears here a little bit. We have a lot of people in our audience that are just getting into the executive ranks. You've been a CEO for a number of years. When you look at building your ELT, and the types of personalities, the types of skills, the kind of chemistry you want, the kind of culture you want in your ELT. As a CEO, kind of what do you look for? What kinds of people do you want to populate your ELT for like maximum performance?
I think there's two answers to that question. If you're early stage and trying to figure out what is the purpose of the company, what are the values, your culture you want to build, and the strategic choices, that's a different answer than when you're established and have already built some of those definitions. So in early stages, what I would say is find people who have common values as you in terms of ethics and hard work, in terms of the ability to solve problems independently, self-starting,
Right.
just passionate. There's a saying, first who, then what. Have you heard that saying? It's Jim Collins' Good to Great saying.
Good to great, yeah.
So in early stages, it is first who, then what.
Right.
And just get people who are committed, who are similar in terms of values and problem solving, passionate about the idea and ready to work hard with you. Because, you're kind of signing up with folks for a pretty arduous journey.
Right.
Lots of ups and downs, right? So you want to be in the right boat with the right people. As you're established and you've already built out some of your ELT, the company has defined the values and the culture that it wants. The company has defined the purpose. Why does your company exist? And if it went away, would the world care? The company's defined strategic choices. You have limited capital, you have limited time. You have to pick your spots. So if you've defined those things, when you're interviewing for additions to the ELT after you've defined those things, then the question is, do they fit into those definitions? Because you want alignment. Now, it's okay to find people with different skill sets. You want different views on things, but the core foundation has to be aligned for the thing to work out. That's what I would say, number one. Number two is going back to good to great. Our vision of what is a great leader is the paradoxical combination in good to great of deep humility and this massive competitive will to win together, which is so paradoxical because, as you know, when you meet people, it's either one or the other.
Oftentimes,
and so good to great and level 5 leadership is all about the paradoxical, symbiotic blend of the two. And because that's not a natural motion for human beings, it's something that has to be practiced every day. So does that person have the capacity to be humble, to listen, to know that they can be wrong, and to always every day wake up and say, I'm going to be a better version of myself today?
Right.
Versus look at what I've done.
Yeah.
At the same time, do they have this personality that loves winning and hates losing and is always going to work towards that win without getting the ego inflated together? That's a hard thing.
That's really hard. What do you do when you have an ELT with, two questions. You're building an ELT, you're building an executive team, and I feel like a lot of us have this tendency to sort of hire people that are very similar to ourselves. How do you force yourself to get away from that?
That's a good question. You have to see the value in the differences. You have to know that you have weaknesses and opportunities for growth. If you're a level 5 leader, you should always be humble and know that. So there's nothing wrong. You have to say this to yourself. There's nothing wrong with being in a room with people who are smarter than you and getting feedback from those people. All you get is growth. All you get is upside. That's very hard to stomach for a leader that has to appear as authoritative and in charge. You don't have to be authoritative in charge. In fact, if you've gone to leadership, lots of seminars on this, they'll show you a video of a room of people. And they're debating an issue and challenging. And then they'll ask you, who's the leader in this room? And it's probably often, if they're trying to show you the model of great leadership, it's the person on the side, letting the conversation happen organically, letting people interject themselves and not taking over until it's the right time to do that.
That's so good. I love that. It's a good leadership lesson for a lot of people. I know exactly what you're talking about, where every time I've asked anybody who the best boss was that they worked for, that person was invariably the way that you're describing, 100%. So the other part of the question I was going to ask you is when you end up with a leadership team that's high sort of collaboration, high performance, very skilled team, and they get along well with each other, but you have one person who's kind of atypical from that group and sometimes causes friction. What's the best way to deal with somebody like that? Because you don't want to like immediately go to the worst case scenario. They're an extremely valuable, very highly skilled person, but the chemistry just isn't there, maybe. How do you deal with that situation?
That's a loaded question. So let's take the extremes. There might be one situation where the person is either toxic or misaligned with the group and not going in the same direction. They could have been valuable at one time, but somehow they changed. And that happens in level 5 leaders. Is one day they're humble, and next thing there's a shift towards look at what I did, look at who I am.
Right.
If that's happening, then you've got to take action. You can't afford to have a fragmented leadership team. On the other hand, there could be differences in opinions, right? Like you could have passionate opinions, both that are right, but going in the other way on a topic that you have to handle. So the point there is to allow the conversation to happen. And then at some point, you as a leader have to come in and say, listen, we've debated this long enough. Now we got to move. We got to take a decision. Here's the way we're going to go. Here's my inputs and how I came to that decision. Now I need you all behind me because we've debated this too long. Now, the third thing you have to be very careful of is then there's these back channel and under the covers movements, splitting the company apart. Right. You cannot have a company that's splitting apart because people's egos are hurt or they're going in different directions. Right. So if you're finding that that's not being respected, and then there's movements and there's gossiping and things like that in politics, then you have to take action. Because that'll suck the life out of a company.
Yeah. You have to kill that pretty quickly. That's great. That's super interesting because you almost never have a perfect ELT. There's always something that you have to worry about. And sometimes it's this situation where there's one person who doesn't have the same cultural values or chemistry or whatnot. This is something that I wondered about as well, that, it's sort of like when you get to a certain point as an executive, you start to go into higher levels and you have a sense of like, this is how it's going to be. And then you get there and it sometimes is quite different maybe. For you, now you've been a CEO for many years, but when you first got into the role, how was it different than what you had imagined it to be? For some of our folks who are aspiring to the highest position in the corporate world, what's the reality of being a CEO versus the just thinking and aspiring to it part of it?
The reality is very different than what we think it is. We think it's a position of authority. We think we're going to walk into a room and command the room. And we're going to be able to set strategy and vision and just from this top-down approach and just have this massive movement towards where we want to go. In reality, the great leader, the CEO, is a listener. They are caring about the people and the vision. They're passionate about the things that have to get done to get there. You're usually often lonely at the top. And so that often isn't talked about, but it's very lonely at the top because you have different people working on different things. And ultimately, they're coming to you and you have to arbitrate. You have to make decisions. You have to go forward. And really, you need a bit of a mentorship, a bit of a kind of a set of folks you can go to get advice. So it's not as authoritative as they say. I think the other thing is Jeff Bezos had a great saying, and I think Steve Jobs said the same thing, is as someone who's a leader and as someone who's trying to make an impact in the world and change things and be innovative, you have to be ready to be misunderstood, which means you've thought a lot about something, you've talked to a lot of groups about something, and now you're trying to take that vision forward, and guess what? They resist. So don't get offended. Don't take it personally. Just understand that there's many people out there who most are sincere, some may not be sincere, but they just don't understand where you're trying to go. Don't blink. Just keep explaining your vision over and over and over, and don't take it personally.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, again, it requires a lot of humility and the ability to say, hey, I'm not a privileged authority. I'm actually a servant of the people.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. This whole notion of not taking it personally and having some level of being misunderstood, I think is such a huge part of almost any kind of leadership when you're trying to do something different or new or big. I mean, it almost always comes with the territory, it feels like. And it's so funny because after a year of patience and everybody just kind of poking holes into it, and then finally everybody gets it, oftentimes people are like, this was my idea all along. I knew this was going to work. This is awesome. This is great. And that's when you sit back and you're like, it worked. The patience worked.
It has to be their ideas, right?
Yeah.
So I think Bezos said this about reviews, product reviews on Amazon.
Yeah.
He said in the early days, I introduced the idea. And people said, that's crazy. What if we get bad reviews about the products?
Right.
He said, that's exactly why we need to do this, because we want to tell the consumer what these products are. Nobody bought it, and he had to keep explaining it, and it worked out well for them.
Yeah. Nasser, now a few more questions I've always wanted to talk to you about in your position, because you had so much success, especially with some exits and so forth. But when you're running a business and you have all these different personalities that are helping you run it. There's some personalities who are more numbers based, some personalities who are maybe more organic, instinct based, some people who are just amazing at people and social skills. How do you personally sort of choose to run a company? Is it better to constantly keep everybody focused on the numbers? Is it better to do things more on that social personal level and think of it that way? Of course, every business has to in the end look at the numbers, but I mean like day-to-day culture wise, what do you prefer talking about in your meetings? Like, for example, me, from coming from a product and technology standpoint, I think I would lean way more towards the numbers side, because if somebody says to me, oh, the customers loved it, I want to know how many customers, what's their ARR, all the different aspects of it. But then there's people in product and engineering who are completely the opposite of that. Where do you kind of end up on the spectrum?
Yeah, I hate to say it depends, but there's a balance of both. I really believe that if you want a great company and something that's special, solving problems and has changed the world, then you're going to have a combination of instinct and your knowledge and those conversations you've had with customers and users, your knowledge of using products. At the same time, you want some data, because companies need to work off of facts, not emotions. So you have to find the balance of those two. At early stages of the company, probably there's more instinct involved. As you scale the thing, and now you're going to put $1 million, $10 million into sales and marketing, or you're going to amplify a product. Okay, now you need some more data, because you can't, what got you here isn't going to get you there. I would say it's a combination of both, but even when you get large, you still have to have a blend of instinct in that thing, because instinct is something that it's not as quantifiable, but it's something that is well researched, right? Because if you did, for example, talk to a lot of customers, I'll give you an example. We were building a new product, and we had a lot of voices of people that had opinions on what to put in the product.
Right.
But we had this one customer who said, I used this product from you guys, and I want you to build this other product that we were thinking about. And she said to me, we've researched every solution out there. We've researched 6 different solutions. We've gotten quotes and we've gotten demos. So we know what we're looking for. We want you to build it based on your ethos of how you build products. So I'm like, that's a well-informed, highly researched customer. They're going to get a higher voice, a bigger voice from me than other customers who haven't done that work. So what I did actually was we took people out of the room versus bring more people in the room when we designed the thing with these types of folks. And we got a killer product out of that. And that was, a combination of some data, but a lot of instinct as well.
That's a fantastic example.
And the last thing I would say to you is Warren Buffett has a saying, I would rather be approximately right than precisely wrong. And so I've also seen, even when you get large,
Yeah.
And you have these big spreadsheets, and I've seen people do this, and they have these massive spreadsheets, and they're making conclusions, but one of the formulas is going the wrong way.
Mm.
And so they lose sight of the big picture because they're in so much of this detail. So I think everybody has to understand the black box, or you're living off of a lot of data that nobody understands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a fantastic example. Okay, a couple tactical questions as a CEO. One thing that I've noticed as I've grown in my own career is that as you manage more and more people, being able to communicate with everybody in a timely fashion becomes more and more difficult. And sometimes you start making people upset because you can't get back to them on time. And you want to be able to. I had a boss who knew the names of all 400 people in our company and would make it a point to respond to each one of them. And that was like a 1% of 1% who can do that. She's staying up till 1 a.m, responding to some random SDR somewhere in California or something. But that's not easy for everybody. How do you deal with this? You're the CEO of a company. Everybody wants your time. Nasser, can I just get 15 minutes? I need to talk to you about this. How do you deal with that without making people upset and irritated? Is there some secret sauce to that?
I'm pretty unconventional that way. What I try to do is get out there a lot. So I will walk around the office as much as I can. Every day, I'll just block some time and walk around. And I'll walk over to folks and say, hey, what are you working on? How can I help you with that? And, if you sit down beside them on, and you're both looking at their computer and their problem, and you're solving it, it's a wonderful way to kind of get to know the folks. Just be present, be active in the company is my first thing. Mm-hmm. Number 2 is create a rhythm of reaching out to your people. So we had daily stand-ups for all our teams, and I was invited to any one of them that I wanted to go to. We had a weekly all hands for all our people where we would just communicate. And there'll be times when our leadership team would say, hey, there's nothing new this week. And I'd be like, there's got to be something new. There's got to be something. Let's connect to them. I mean, we put this rhythm in place. Let's tell them about the new sales we did last week.
Right. Exactly.
Let's tell them about some of the things we're seeing with the bug tickets. Let's tell them about some of the things we're seeing with HR events, right? Let's get them excited about the town hall that's coming up next week or next month. Mm-hmm. We had a board meeting. Let's just give them an update on what we discussed at the board meeting. There's always something to talk about.
Right.
That's 2. 3 is it's very hard, once you get 400, 500 people to remember everybody's name. Mm-hmm. And if you're staying up at 1 till 1 at night, then you're also sacrificing health, family, and other things. Mm-hmm. So I always used to say to people at Paymerang, your family, your health is much more important than work, always. Mm-hmm. At the same time, your work is important because you put a lot of your life into it, right? You're spending 8 hours a day at least on this. Mm-hmm. So let's find a way to make those things live together.
Right.
And we did that, and they knew that, we appreciated them. There's a time when, I would just go into the lunchroom to make sure I could see who's around, and I would just grab my stuff and sit beside a group and say, hey, can I join you? Mm-hmm. And we get to know each other that way. But it gets harder to know all the names when you get larger.
Yeah, it does. I one time was talking to a friend of mine who knows you as well. We won't name any names, but I asked her, I said, how was the talk that Nasser did? And she was like, oh, it was wonderful. Nasser is full of charisma and he connected with everybody in the room. And there's like 30 or 40 people. You were doing a talk about leadership and all of that. And I noticed as well, you just have this natural charisma. Not every CEO, not every executive is like that. How can people who are maybe extremely skilled, maybe somebody who's like a VP of customer support is like a master of setting up the organization for customer support and has all the systems, process of people locked down and amazing, that they just can't rise to the next bigger company, the next bigger customer support VP or chief customer support officer role, because they're lacking this ability to like broadly connect with groups of people and be seen as like that natural leader and stuff. So we don't have that thing that you naturally seem to come with. How can people develop that? Is it even possible to develop that?
I'll give you an example of love. I met Clay Christensen. I don't know if you remember him.
Yeah.
Harvard professor.
Intel guy. Yeah.
Yeah. The Innovator's Dilemma.
The Innovator's Dilemma. Yep.
And I met him and he told us a story about him as a professor and his journey. And he said that he used to get amazing scores from his students. And then all of a sudden his scores started going down. And he wondered why they were going down and he couldn't figure it out. And he tried to do focus groups and a lot of things. And he was on a flight and he was sitting beside a Native American tribal elder. Hmm. And he just started talking to this person and said, hey, I've got this problem. Can you help me with it? And the person looked at him and said, he listened to his journey and what was going on. He said, I can tell you what the problem is. It's love. You don't have love anymore as much as you used to. You don't have love for the students and you don't have love for the work. And I don't see that love the way he explained it to me in the earlier days. Get that love back and that care back for the people. Your charisma will come back. Your scores will come back.
So, that's fascinating. Let me pull on that thread a little bit because we try to be on Technocratic Podcast, try to be as practical and straightforward as possible. I tend to lose the love when I feel like there's incompetence coming from the person. So I'm paying somebody $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 a year, and I'm like, they're not delivering on the things that I want. They might be amazing people, but my love starts to go down. Now, I know many times that's absolutely not the right answer. You need to do something different. But how do you... There's a lot of people I know that are just like me, and they'll like swap that person out and find another person and, do all kinds of things. But what's the better, I don't know if that's a real right leadership answer. When somebody's not doing well, how do you keep the love there?
I start with the Ted Lasso quote, be curious, not judgmental. So start with understanding the situation, what's going on, why are they not getting what they want? But you are paying 300, 400 grand, so this can't go on for months.
All right.
So try to understand first. Once you understand, you're going to come to probably 3 conclusions. One is their heart isn't in the game anymore, and they're just not giving it their all. 2 is they're struggling because there's some fundamental issues that are happening in the business that are not allowing them to succeed, which you as a leader have to unblock for them. And the 3rd is you come away with some gray area between those 2. Then that's a hard one. But in the other 2, it's pretty easy, Bobby. If it's the first one, you got to have a conversation. You have to look at them in the eye and ask them, are you still in this with us? Because this is what we want. And you're not there. And then they should know where they stand. The worst thing for people is to not know where they stand with you.
Yeah, that's horrible.
So tell them where they stand. Where you stand right now is you're not getting the job done and I'm not happy with your performance. And I think you can do better. Yeah. I hired you knowing that you can do better and you made these promises to me and I know you're disappointed with yourself. That's one.
Yeah.
Or maybe we need to part ways or maybe we need to change. Do you agree with that? The other one is, okay, I haven't been a fair leader to you because I know you're suffering and I haven't removed your obstacles. Let me help you with that.
Right.
Those are the 2 alternatives.
I love that framework. So either it's a personal thing or it's a business thing or it's a blend. And the first 2 are semi-easily solvable. That's great. Okay, let's talk about one last thing in the executive ranks. Obviously, a lot of us have been involved in exit processes and going through selling a company and all the due diligence that involves and all the management decks that you have to build and meeting with the acquiring company and 1,001 other things. It can be a very grueling process. I've gone through it many times and it is great when the exit is complete, but it takes a lot out of you. How have you found the process for yourself and how should a leader, is it possible for an executive or a leader to find balance in that process? I personally don't think so, but I'm curious about what your opinion is on it.
I think you can find balance. I think the first thing is to have a right-hand person, highly organized, high throughput of data that can manage the data room and manage all of the information that the buyers need. That frees you up and the team to be creative and provide the vision of the company and other things. So, there's just a lot of numbers, a lot of number crunching and analysis that happens. You need to be organized and disciplined around that. That will free you up to be the visionary to sell, where you want to go and how you're going to get there to the buyers. Then there's the emotional game. There's an emotional energy in the company and with your people. People know what's going on.
Right.
They see people in suits walking around. They know something's going on.
Mm-hmm.
The investors have been in this for 5, 10 years, so they know that there's going to be an exit.
Mm-hmm.
And if something doesn't happen, even though you go through all that process, there's a bit of a disappointment in the energy of the company. So you got to build that energy back up.
Mm-hmm.
So managing energy is another part of it. And the last thing is, as a CEO, you just need to walk into the room as the true, like the one who loves the business, is the visionary in the business, and ready to defend it and represent it to the highest kind of love and energy.
Right.
Right. And people see that. And when they see that, they buy in and they believe in you. And guess what? That's how, we were able to compete and grow the business against much more highly funded competitors than we were.
Mm-hmm.
And we, I used to go to trade shows in the early days and I'd see, this massive booth by our competitor and lots of people. And here we were in a little corner with a tiny little booth, but we never stopped believing in ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
A few years later, some of those folks were gone and we were still there in a bigger booth, so that part of it is really believing and projecting that energy.
Right.
And then making sure there's a division of labor. Like somebody has to compile all the data and organize in the data room. Somebody has to manage the calendar, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's the side job for everybody because we all have to run the business.
Right. Exactly. That's great advice. So get somebody to help you for sure. And I think my own experience has been like, even with that help, it's like when the buyers say jump, you got to jump. The logistics of the process, just constantly adjusting and changing. You have to work through all of that. You really are doing 2 full-time jobs. You're running the company and you're selling the company. And it's just like, you guys just got to suck it up. If you want the exit, you got to do both things at the same time. At least that's what I've found. Okay. We're almost wrapping up here, but I really want to ask you about managing product and engineering. You've obviously managed every department under the sun, from product engineering to sales, marketing, support, everything, finance. What have you found is different about managing VPs of product, VPs of engineering versus, for example, sales and marketing? Is there anything that strikes you as very different between the two?
I think they are very different, but I think we tend to lump them into the same kind of processes, and it actually takes them in the wrong direction. So for me, let's start with sales because I think it's black and white. Sales is really a numbers game. Right. Whether you have one salesperson or 20 salespeople, the question is, what are the leading activities that are going to get you to the results, which is bookings? The leading activities includes pipeline development, partnerships, and bringing in inbound as well as going outbound, and having good lists and having good motions, right? So the first thing is a good handle on what math has to happen to get good results.
Right.
And executing to that math. That is pure process. Along the way, there's coaching around, how to handle objections and how to keep motivated and all those things. But at the end of the day, a portfolio of salespeople is based on a set of numbers that have to be achieved. And that's why we pay them commissions, because it's very objective. Mm-hmm. Product and engineering is a tough one. In large organizations, you believe that product and engineering is all about sizing and process and trade-offs and a lot of, charts and meetings, because you want discipline, right? The discipline. The problem with that is along the way, a lot of people forget about the customer and the user experience. And then a lot of people, because you have big meetings, a lot of people throw ideas in, and next thing you know, you have all these features that nobody asked for. Right. So to me, product and engineering is more of an art, whereas sales is a science of numbers. And that now you're right. There should be. I remember, when you were working with us, you always said, we need to have discipline around it. And so, when you go for a feature or when you select a project, there should be a revenue associated with it. And then it should be prioritized relative to others based on what's the outcome you're going to get and what's the effort required, right? X and Y axis. So we did do that. But if you do that too rigorously, you just become a tick the box shop. Okay,
I have a thought for you on that. I love that you're saying this, because I've had this feeling for the longest time that, like, I say this to a lot of my friends. I'm like, Sales has taken essentially a human activity. Sales departments in the world have taken a human activity and they've turned it into a science. A bunch of gregarious people have taken their social activity and turned it into a science. Every part of sales is analyzed 6 ways to Sunday, because that's a growth engine of the company. Then a whole bunch of scientists and engineers have gotten together in product and engineering, and they have taken their personal engineering expertise and numbers orientation and turned it into a beautiful black box.
Right.
It's a black box where people like you and sometimes CTOs like me who get to a certain level, we don't know a lot of what's happening in that black box. Let's be honest. There's some weird magic happening over there. But product leaders and engineering leaders, and in a lot of cases, I think have done a disservice to product engineering by making it from a science and numbers game into some kind of weird, I don't even know what to call it. I don't know if it's art, but it's
their proprietary black box.
Their proprietary magic, whatever it is. And it's weird how that has happened in those opposing ways. I think I like the idea of like operationalizing creativity. Okay. Like I like the idea of taking your roadmap and enforcing a swim lane in it where you just go and talk to customers and experiment and build experimental things. And let's serve that need for art and creativity. But the rest of the time, what I like is seeing the numbers in product and engineering, and I think my thing would be like 2080. Now, I do agree with you that a lot of companies are just like go to insane levels where product engineering is not allowed to be creative at all. They barely talk to the customer, and that seems so silly. It's absurd. That should not happen either. But then the flip side of it shouldn't happen either. Where I remember some board meeting I was in 5 years ago, where some company had spent like $11 million and had no idea what they spent it on in product and engineering or what they got out of it. They didn't know the I or the R of ROI. And I was blown away by that. That should not be allowed. Like that should not be a thing, But so
maybe it takes us to where we started this with. It's about jobs to be done. Did product engineering build stuff that did a job, made a customer happy, or automated something internally?
Yeah.
Or do you have the $11 million and you don't know what you got? So if you have $11 million and you don't know what you got, then people aren't walking around enough and they're not talking to customers enough.
Yeah, exactly. That is very important. Do you think AI changes the game in product and engineering? I mean, AI can help one product manager, quote unquote, talk to a lot more customers. Maybe not in the way that a natural human interaction would be, but at least it would be more than zero, and it would be through some AI. That's changing.
You could simulate conversations and get crowdsource some feedback. I think that would be valuable, only if that's taken with a bit of a grain of salt and said, okay, that's one input. That's not going to define the whole product. It's one input. It'll help me to get some bearings, and then I can do the other things like get in front of my customers and other things. So I think it's one data point is all I would say. AI should always be a co-pilot. It should never be the pilot.
Okay, got it. These futurists, let's call them, and AI CEOs that are talking about AI being the sole pilot, the sole decision maker. If the technology gets there, it's not there right now, obviously, in almost any field. But if it gets there in 3 years, okay, how will businesses, do you think, use the AI? Will they say, hey, we don't need a VP of engineering, we don't need a VP of product, this AI can just make all the decisions? Or are we too much of a social animal, social species, whatever, to do something like that? Of course, there'll be a lot of companies that totally do that, but in what's your future outlook on something like that?
I think a human touch is always something that we need as people, as consumers of products, as business people who are going to buy things. So I think Steve Jobs said it is, if you love the species and the planet and the world that you're in, and you want to give something to it, then put your creativity in the stuff you put out and put your emotions into it, and it'll create something great. AI is never going to put emotions into things.
All right.
So I think, again, it's a good starting point. It's not the end all be all. But what it can do is turn an enterprise that used to run on 10,000 people into an enterprise that can run on 1,000 people. But you'll still need those 1,000 people. Like Sam Altman says, we did a lot at OpenAI with 250 people. We always wanted a small group of really thoughtful people. So I don't think you should ever let yourself get away from the human touch in anything that you do in a business.
Yeah.
And then also my last thing is that's why you had the $11 million black box. Because people thought they could just put something into an algorithm that would then think for them. It can never happen.
That's such a powerful point. There's this thing called Jevons paradox, which just says that when you're able to innovate at a much more rapid pace, like let's say with AI, maybe AI lets us make 10 times the software that a typical enterprise could build without it. Jevons paradox says that the commensurate demand will also rise. So sometimes I wonder if, as a business person, I think about that 10,000 people, work being done by 1,000 people, pretty incredible and cool. But will the demand increase? And then you're a company that's building 10 times the software, so you're back up to 10,000 people or whatever. There's that to contend with also. And it's the Jevons paradox thing that happened in many industries, when they've gotten technological innovation happening.
So if you offer more, you'll get more demand. I guess build it and it will come kind of thing.
Partially, yeah. I mean, there's a famous example of Henry Ford and the Ford Motor Company, and they innovated obviously with all sorts of things in their factories, including conveyor belts and so forth. And it's not like the demand for cars went down; it just went up and up and up. The same thing with it's a more modern example, but YouTube videos. I mean, they used to take a huge effort to make one really, really well produced YouTube video. Now it takes with these tools, it takes 1/10 of the time to do the same production value. But YouTube demand is more than ever. YouTube's scaling
I would say two things: is the cars give us utility, and the YouTube videos give us a lot more doom scrollers. So the point is, if can maximize the things we put out, then there's a lot more companies putting out a lot more things, and now we'll have a lot of junk within those things, especially if they're black boxes that nobody understands, right? And they don't achieve the goals. So I think it's a dangerous concept that it's true, actually, that there's a lot more content. Have you noticed there's so many white papers? Have you seen how many white papers?
Oh, man, it's nuts. Yeah.
So the question is, which are the valuable white papers?
Right. That's so true.
And has that created more of a need for white papers? No.
Right.
I want less white papers. Now when I see a white paper, I cringe. I'm like, I don't even want to read this. So I may be missing some really good white papers. So I think that is going in the wrong direction right now.
Absolutely. That's such a good example. That is how we're going to end on that. That's actually a perfect example. I hope that gives some food for thought to our audience. I think we're at the end of our time. It was a pleasure talking with you today, Nasser.
Thank you, Bobby. Great questions. And let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely. I'm sure our listeners will have taken a lot from your insights. And I want to thank our audience for joining. You can catch all the rest of our podcasts at technocratic.io. In the meantime, keep the sharks swimming, and I'll see you next week.